I think we're live. I think there's like 400 clips of me just saying, okay, I think we're live, because I'm just that nervous that we're not because of the application, the software. Okay, we're live. This is episode 51. I'm here with Zach Sherf. And I'm super excited to talk about this because we're talking about what Zach brought up, which is the challenge of building a framework-centric security program. Like, it's not that simple, y'all. And I'd love to be the guy that goes, this one crazy trick, this one easy solve. And Zach, I'm sure you would be as well. But why don't you introduce yourself, brother, and let's get it going. If you're out there, please chat. I'll see you from LinkedIn, from his LinkedIn. I'll also see it from my YouTube. So put in comments. Tell us how smart Zach is and how dumb Matt is, and we'll rock through this conversation in a glorious way. So introduce yourself, Zach. What's going on? And tell me what the premise of why we wanted to have this conversation, man.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. My name is Zach Sherf. I'm the director of cybersecurity for Interlaced. We're an MSP, initially based out of Southern California, now nation and worldwide. And
Does that mean I can call you Mr. Worldwide? Because I haven't had anybody I've been able to call that, or is that too much?
I legally don't know if you can call me Mr. Worldwide.
Like, is there a certain I don't know. I must cross, or certain numbers of longitudes that must be crossed?
My audience is small enough, and your audience is large enough that it might pose a risk.
Okay, well, let's just say we'll call you Zach then. For now, in that case. Sorry for that side tangent.
And so we spent, and the reason I'm really excited to be here is we spent a little over the last year figuring out how we can best enable our clients to really guide them through implementing the CIS control set, even starting with IG1.
Yeah.
And candidly, we tried a lot of different things and learned a lot about it, but in some ways didn't succeed in the way that we had originally set out to. And so we've migrated and moved the program, but I think on the tail end of where we are now, there's just a lot of challenges and learnings that I think would be beneficial to share with the broader community.
Yeah. Our pain, your gain conversation is really what you're trying to bring up, is where do you fail? Where does it suck? What are the challenges?
Yeah.
One of the first things I'd love to tackle, Zach, and I'm putting you on the spot because we haven't had this conversation. Have you implemented these yourself? Did you start there? Or did you start with a client first? How did you go about it? Because and I'll let you answer here in a second, but I've got so many people in this world want to look up as MSPs and say, I wish my vendor would do this. I wish they had their SOC 2. I wish they would follow this. I wish they had good secure design. I wish they had all these bug bounty. I wish they had all these things. And they'll look down and go, I wish my clients would do this. I wish I could get them bought in to do this. I wish my clients would do that. They'll look down, but it's rare they look inward. So did you start on you, hopefully?
So to a degree, yes. Right.
Okay.
And the reason I say to a degree.
Thank you for the honesty.
Yeah. Right. So the reason I say to a degree is I think that we went through a number of different approaches to figure out what the best approach to cybersecurity for us would be, whether we go with a purely risk-based approach or just kind of framework-based approach. And we started with risk-based, right?
Yeah.
And what we realized quickly, and I think this was one of the learnings that led us to going towards a framework-based approach for our clients, is that with small businesses, which is, one of our core markets, with small businesses, it's really difficult to do to justify the cost of a formal risk assessment, especially when a lot of the clients are looking to just understand what is best practice, what's best hygiene, how can I put in the, for lack of a better phrase, low effort, high reward, or even high effort, high reward type situation or type solutions. And a risk assessment, I think for a lot of these organizations felt kind of esoteric and difficult to go through.
And maybe let's disambiguate this for anybody watching, because I think you may have just fired a shot against most people that go risk-based centrism. Yeah. So just to understand that first, you just threw that out there. So let's dig into that a little bit, because there are risk assessments where people are doing some type of assessment that is purely sales, that will break out these 5 or 6 or 7 things that help you move the needle to get in the door. And there are risk assessments that are a qualitative or quantitative methodology, digging deep into the weeds of decisions and trying to make overarching decisions of your overall cybersecurity program. There are two, in my mind, those are two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Which end of that spectrum in your mind were you talking about when you say these risk assessments that are more expensive?
The by the book NIST based.
Okay. All right,
Yeah,
great. I wanted to
the
disambiguate
one
that
that's
for the
expensive.
audience. Yes,
Yeah.
because the free sales tools is not what you're talking about here. You're talking about genuine
Yes.
then this assessments of current status quo
So we
versus low
tried to
hanging.
build those sales tools out, and I felt that those were to some degree kind of I shouldn't keep firing shots. To some
I'm
degree,
great with disingenuous. I'm cool with what you're about to
disingenuous,
say there.
right?
Yeah, I got you.
It's
You're not
like
wrong.
it's hard to find that data. The insurance
Here's the
company,
2 cannons that'll sink your ship, let
yeah,
alone the other 370 cannons that'll sink your ship, right? Like,
yeah.
anyways, I
So there were
digress.
I felt like we weren't really doing our clients justice in that, because those assessments might as well have been framework based instead of risk based, right?
Yeah,
Like
no doubt.
you're just creating like a hyper local, hyper focused version of the framework and of risk based only on what you can provide as an organization, right? And so it ignores the
I'm just
broader
gonna stay
picture.
right here. Like it's
It's-
gonna hurt, but I'm gonna stay here a minute. You go.
okay. And so what we found with the CIS controls, and the reason that we went in that direction was because we realized that we were effectively picking from a list with that type of approach where it's just kind of a hyper localized. And we said, why don't we refer to the authority that exists in the industry, of people who like basically spend all of this time trying to figure out what the largest risks that face business are,
Yeah,
especially small business and things like that. Like these are experts who are working on defending and protecting enterprise, but
yeah.
because it's so fundamentals based, it does work at effectively every level of the scale.
Dude, yeah.
So
I
that's the
wanna
reason we started to choose CIS, and why we ultimately went from the hyper expensive risk based like
yeah.
NIST risk based approach into CIS, as we found like we need to make action now. Let's start on these things, and then as the maturity increases and there's more of a need and an ROI on the
Yeah.
NIST based risk assessment, we can go back and have so much more visibility and confidence into what we're doing today to answer the right questions on
You
something like that.
Dude, I'm literally probably done talking about cybersecurity. Like Zach's got it solved. Genuinely, I may literally retire at this point. I think genuinely, when you think about it, there's a couple things you said that were brilliant there. Number one would be you're shifting the authority outside of your control.
Mm-hmm.
You're now saying, and same thing with the NIST risk assessment. Don't take me for saying that's not in the same vein, but you're now saying, okay, here's pragmatic stuff that's the low hanging fruit. Here's IG1s of something like CIS. It applies to NIST. It applies to NSCSF. And to your point, the second brilliant thing you said is I think that you understand that as you're doing this work, it's not wasted work. It's the exact opposite of the risk assessment in the sense that you're doing the stuff you're going to find as a no on the checkbox on the risk assessment.
Yep.
Let's just close the holes in the ship. Let's take care of 20 of these 300 cannon holes, right? In some way.
Yep.
And I think so that's brilliant as well, is that you're now creating this reparative piece, not just this kind of did it get a hole, right? And then the other piece of this was just being able to break it into small actionable today things and understand there's a list and a grader as we go. So dude, that was just a whole ball of
Yeah.
awesome. So let's get to the
But I
meat of what
don't
we were
think
going to go into. Okay, where's the failures? Let's talk about the failures
I
from
was
our
gonna say I don't
awesome.
think I answered your question about if we did it first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we did. And I think that created simultaneously a lot of confidence and a little bit of maybe even false confidence around how it would go outside of our organization. Because
Because you have bought in players, you have people that
we
are
bought
on
in
board to do
players,
this.
we're a
Yeah,
tech focused organization. Everybody in the org, like it was easy to come in and build a culture around security because everybody's interested in cybersecurity.
sure. There's
Just
not a knowledge curve to
and
overcome, right? You don't have
everybody's
to be
committed
educating, yeah, for the
to the
most part, a
importance
little
of
bit.
it, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
everybody's super committed to it, which is great and something I expected to exist elsewhere. And that was probably
Oh,
probably
young
my first
child.
probably my first misstep. And that's if I were to boil it down to three big categories for the missteps, the first one would be client commitment, right?
Okay.
Like we talked
Yeah.
a little bit about
Buy-in,
that.
hearts and minds
Yeah,
conversation.
and
Yep.
we can get commitment through our points of contact. We can get commitment through key decision makers. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
you have organizational commitment and
You don't have
trying to
stakeholder buy-in. You don't have
yeah,
organizational commitment,
yeah,
culture. Yeah.
trying to empower people within that organization to do that because they have the leeway and we're effectively an MSP. We don't
Yeah.
have the same leeway
You
as
don't roll up and
leadership
sit at the
anymore.
same coffee pot and talk about yesterday's boss meeting
Yeah.
and
We
conversation
don't,
around the
right?
changes.
And so
No,
that
it's not our world.
rapport, we deliver
Yeah,
great service, but the rapport, the personal rapport, just takes significantly more time
yeah,
and
yeah,
effort and things. And it's
yeah.
very
To your
difficult for
point, so
anyone to
that's the
work together.
second category, right?
Yeah.
What's the next one?
So we've got resourcing,
Yeah,
which I'll be totally transparent, we grossly underestimated on. And we kept our
on
commitment
your side or on the client side or both?
both.
Yeah,
Both.
yeah.
Yeah.
How much work it's going to take to get this done as a resource
Yep.
perspective, right?
Yep. And that
Um,
ties right back into client commitment.
okay.
Right. Because we didn't understand.
Yeah, yeah. I need to do another 40 hours of an FTE over the
Yeah.
next 3 weeks just to get
Yeah.
to this point. I
Yep.
don't have it, Matt. I'm sorry, Zach. I don't have it. I can't give you that resource. She's
Yeah.
already, right? That statement. Yeah.
And back to, I thought this was going to be easy. I thought this was going to be,
Yeah.
right. And
Is
then,
that, if you look at that, Zach,
yeah.
and just, oh, go ahead, continue. You said and then.
And the third one is training, but we can go back to
Okay.
the other thing. But it ultimately was end user training and then training internally of how to scale this out through all of the different, parties within our organization who we would need to scale it out to do that work and to inform and to instill
Yeah.
confidence. That requires a commitment and a significant commitment to internal training to everybody in the org, not just around a security culture, but on how to understand and literally deliver to the intent behind these CIS controls.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you're, just to make sure I understand. So the first one, as we talk about it, is really not expecting that the clients wouldn't have this buy-in. I think all of them seem to have a thematic aspect too, right? As we go through this, right? The first one being not having the client buy-in while expecting it was one of the first stumbles. Did I understand that correctly, Zach?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say
Okay.
that's fair.
So when you think that out, there's components of the second one that come into that, right? Not knowing how many hours and how much resource it was going to take. How many, like, think about things that are like 5.2 that says use unique passwords, right? We think immediately towards using a password manager. Slam done, right? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell a story. My wife's watching, so she may come in here and slap me. We'll see what happens. But I play with fire all the time. But my wife and I bought a password manager like 3 or 4 years ago. And at that time, I said, hey, get all your passwords, your personal passwords in a password manager. And I'm going to do the same. We're going to move forward. And that way we can help meet 5.2. Like
I did the
ultimately, we're
same
really
thing.
right? Yeah, yeah. We'll see if your outcome was better. You may have been a better educator than me because I come to use my wife's password one time and she's done. She's got them all in. I'm like, yes, this is so awesome. I start looking at them because I'm using her thing to sign into something with her, and they're all exactly the same. They're the exact same password stored. She's stored every password, but it's changed none. It has not met the intent of this aspect, right? And that's a failure on me, which goes to your third point, which is training.
Yep.
And the third point of like this implementation takes training and buy-in and education. Anyways, continue. You had yours, you said?
What I was going to say on the password manager front, I think we're getting close to the point with privileged access management and API controls and things like that we should be able to get to the point where we can go into our password managers and tell it to reset or to go passwordless
Or configure it to make it so that it's known, or to set up reporting
Yep.
capabilities. And
Yep.
we've seen that comes with cost, right? Because
Yep.
think about things like LastPass. I'm doing a webinar with them here in a couple of weeks. It's going to be great. But some of their failure points were things like they wanted to be able to report, which meant they had to keep pieces unencrypted about where you were going and sites of those natures, but they didn't filter it right. And there was other challenges. I won't get into the breaking down the body there, but ultimately, I think to your point, the training part, the resource part, the other pieces are underestimated because people don't get into the how. One of the things that I teach with Chris Johnson at CompTIA is that we always focus on the tool, but we really need to look at the safeguards from a how perspective. Have you had any challenges with like the nomenclature of what's really being asked? What's the real scope of this? How do I scope this in that lens? Anything to speak on there?
100%, right? And I think that starts with control one, right?
Yeah, 1.1 even actually.
1.1. Build and maintain, establish and maintain detailed enterprise asset inventory, right? What does that actually mean?
And 300 words longer under it of what types should be included, including IoT and internet and assets that are devices on the network that are non-net computing devices. And all of it.
All assets with the
Yeah.
potential to store or process data. Do you know how broad that is? And
Yeah.
it's great as a first control because I think it simultaneously sets you up to
Sets the
do every
stage.
other control,
Yeah.
but it highlights just the gap between what
Oh
you
yeah.
think you know about your organization and what is actually out there, right?
Yeah.
And if you get
Yeah.
too kind of overzealous with it, then you start moving as you're doing it, you're thinking to yourself, you're like, I have to, enable security controls on this asset and that, and you
Is
skip all the
MFA
way to
turned on
control
here? Is
three, you
yeah.
skip,
Yeah.
control four, throwing,
Yep.
so on and so forth. And so, but we're talking to, heads of staff and
Yeah.
CFOs
Oh,
and
you nailed it.
people in a broad,
Yeah.
non-technical
Well,
role
well,
within the organization.
pause for a sec, because another thing you talked about first, you said that people aren't bought in like we are, like to your point, the
Hmm.
security culture, and that's a real big problem.
Yep.
But additionally, in your organization, you actually know what's in your organization, even though you suck at it, you know. And how do I know? When we were doing this at Iconic, me and Matt Topper and Jason Farmer and some of the others, we literally just kept finding applications and finding applications and finding applications when you think
Yep.
about 2.1. And we came up with like 67 we still needed to keep, 67 that
Yep.
we still needed to keep. The
Yep.
rest of them, we still got rid of the other 50, 60, 70, 80, moved them to jump boxes, did things like that we needed to do. But,
Hmm.
when you dig into it, I think we get the blessed ability to do that because we have those resources and we can command it as MSPs.
Hmm.
When you think about doing that with your client, think about all that in that lens, all those things you might need to do to be successful. Oh, it's even
Think about
tougher.
one of the simplest ways, and so this was, I think, a little win that we had is we had to figure out creative ways to communicate the intent behind these controls and to
Yeah.
get the result that we want. One of the ways that we did that is by finding systems that we had access to that would maybe collect data about asset inventory that clients might not know about, right? So
Yeah.
that would be going into
By the way, you're describing passive asset discovery, just so you
yeah,
know, in its very nature. So anybody confused in the 1X with passive asset discovery,
yeah.
that's how. That's what Zach's
Because
talking
some
about here. Go ahead,
organizations, if they're
continue.
100% SaaS, are doing some level of passive asset discovery. They just don't have a policy or procedure around it, right? And so they don't know what is actually being collected in those things.
Exactly.
And so
Or
we,
haven't thought creatively enough to know, right? I always like to say something my grandfather said and my father said, which is, don't jump me in a rock pile. I'll sure as shit throw a rock.
yeah,
Right. And it's this understanding of you need to know what's around you. What can you extract information about? You're dude, it's like we're separated at birth and I got the beard and you got the looks and the hair. But like genuinely being able to pull passively information about things we see SaaS, whether it's through DNS queries, whether it's through the SaaS tools they're using, whether it's through asset inventories we're collecting, and then get a handle on it so you can present that, I would imagine,
yep,
Zach, to them to make decisions on and be
yep,
an enabler and an
yep.
empower in that. Is
Instead of
that kind of where you're
asking
going?
them, give us all your stuff so that we can push more work back on you.
Right.
Right. And I think that was an approach we started with is we said, can you get your finance team to go through every credit card invoice and see
Which
what,
is what we did internally, right? That's how
right?
I did it with my
Yeah.
finance team. We said,
Yeah.
pull the invoice and see what software
All the
companies we're
invoices,
paying
I need to
for.
know what people
Yeah.
are expensing. I need to know what people are
Yeah.
charging. I need to know, like, where are we spending money on software
And
that's
that breaks
not
down
our
at
inventory.
buy-in, doesn't it? And so you have to empower them to
Hmm.
overcome that. And in their minds, why? Here's why, Zach. Well, you told me you'd be an all-you-can-eat service provider for MSP for this much a head per user. This 250 or 300 a head you're charging
Yep.
needs to include that, and you have to then educate. And maybe some of it does, right? To your point of going and doing the research with the tools at hand and
Yeah.
coming with the data. Okay, continue. Sorry.
But we, to that point, it was well intentioned within that because more of our clients were asking us around,
It's fair.
around what is the line between cybersecurity and managed services,
Yeah,
and how do we benefit and provide value to our clients because that changes year over year. What clients used to value um,
dude. Oh my
is
gosh.
it's different now. They're looking at us for different things. So how do we meet that need without overly without being condescending, without effectively saying like this isn't us, right? We need to
Yeah.
find a way that it could be us. And this was the
Well,
approach we thought would work. And ultimately it was like it's not to say that it didn't work. It's to say
Yeah.
that we need to find a more creative way to make it work for everybody involved to understand how they could get value and ROI without overcommitting ourselves and
Yep.
without overcommitting labor from our clients, right?
Both sides where possible, right? That's the whole
Mm-hmm.
beauty of trying to figure this out at scale. You know, you said something that like totally triggers me because I like wrote a book about this with Juan Fernandez and
Cool.
and Marnie Stockman and Wes Spencer and um anyways, the concept is this. I genuinely believe, and you tell me if you think I'm wrong, that what we have done as MSPs over the last 10 years is becoming commoditized. And what I mean is, like, think about our days as exchange server admins. We needed a C volume that was on regular spinning disks, maybe RAID 10. I needed to have a D volume or a second volume that had the exchange logs on it. And then I needed to have a volume that had the database that was on at least 10K storage in a RAID 10 format, or SSD and an NVMe as that went potentially. I needed to have those dedicated volumes so I could make sure the performance, but like I had all these things I had to do to make sure Exchange performed well, which most people didn't do. They probably just slapped that some gun on a VM and said, fine.
Yeah.
But even then, when you dig through that process, the work and the things we had to do was so much more to keep that running compared to I pay $20 and I have Microsoft Office 365. I pay $5 and I have Google Workspaces, whatever it is, those numbers, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like that commoditization continues out. And if you think back, if anybody's old enough, we used to put IRQ jumpers on our cards, so I could say this is COM7, right? This is IRQ3 or whatever it may be. Don't butcher me if I'm wrong on those IRQ configurations, but and then plug that in, right, in the card and in our PCI or ISA slot back in the days, right? And so when you think about that, that doesn't happen anymore. I buy a laptop at Best Buy, I sign in. And so that commoditization is playing out in our world. And if you start a company tomorrow, it's identity centric and SaaS centric. And so I think my wrapping that up statement that I want you to take a thought on, Zach, is, does some of this work continue to add the value where the others have been commoditized away as table stakes? Is that part of that change you talk about every year?
Yeah.
In your mind?
I won't overly brag about interlace positioning, but we have and have had for a while a single-digit percentage of our clients with on-prem infrastructure. We're talking,
I love you with all my heart right now, Zach. We were obviously brothers.
We're talking, and any of that, right? And I'm not counting like basic networks that just do Wi-Fi access.
No, I follow. That that has to be there. Yeah, you got to have the plumbing.
Has to be there. And in some organizations, it's just not, right? Like when
they're all at home or completely not,
or remote, 100%. So that does a number of different things. One, it gives us, or it gave us at some level, a competitive advantage that
especially during the pandemic.
Yes, especially in the pandemic. Dude, MSPs who weren't us were making money hand over fist
on pro
converting
services.
Either setting up VPNs, like building out stronger concentrators, doing like moving people into the cloud. And we were like, our clients were prepared, and our clients were thrilled to be prepared for it, which at the end of the day, like, is us doing our job. But to your point, now any new client who joins us, that's table stakes, right? They're a SaaS organization. They want a hybrid workforce. They want to be able to use their iOS, their iPad OS, their Mac OS, their
in a
Windows,
safe way, hopefully.
in a safe way. They want to be able to work from home or a coffee shop or like anywhere in the world. And our clients at the leadership level are asking, how can we do this and balance security, right, in a meaningful way? And like, if we are the people who have the answer to that without it, without taking a scorch the earth nuclear approach, right?
Yeah, which I'm a scorcher sometimes.
Then that's the value that we can provide, right? Like understanding the business value proposition to like making people happy and secure at the same time. And
you nailed it.
Candidly, tremendously challenging. I'm not sure that we have nailed it. Maybe I nailed the concept.
I don't think you ever nail it. One of the things that one of my CEOs said once, Chris Hoos, brilliant human and just good human in general, is I was telling him I had a work-life balance established, right? And he kind of laughed at me a little bit. He says, Matt, go stand on a basketball. Are you ever in balance? Well, no, I'm balancing at all times. He goes, great. You're never in work-life balance either. It's always a challenge. And I think I extract that to also go towards this point, right, as well. And that it's always going to be a challenge of balancing, giving people the ability to magically create crap they care about. That's it. That's the end of the day, whether that's caring for their clients, whether
Hmm.
that's making the Mona Lisa, whatever it may be, give people the ability to magically create. And if you
Yeah.
can do that in a way that creates security, then you are winning. And what's
Yeah.
interesting about the world that you and I live in, think about, and describe is that when you do apply those safeguards, you almost can apply, I'd probably put 50 or 60% of the technical controls apply unilaterally for all of those consumers. You can do
Hmm.
the same things. Now it's just educating. Why am I turning on, strong authentication? Why am I
Yep.
turning on and enabling these things? And so
Yep.
it does give you one place to script it, which means you can script the experience too.
Hmm.
Um, what are some of the other failures you've run into, like in this implementing safeguards? Because that's what people love. I'm giving the people what they want is our
Giving the people what
failures
they
and
want.
blood and tears.
So I have a couple specific examples, right? The legwork, we talked about the legwork behind software assets, and building the asset inventory, like all of that. That just requires a lot of commitment. And I think where we failed on that was properly communicating to our clients how much work it would take on their end to do it and getting their buy-in. Because I think we got their
What
buy-in.
was that kind of work? What was the stuff they're having to do? Help me understand that just so people get it kinesthetically.
Yeah, so I mean, like we talked about the billing thing, right? Like pull all
Right.
your credit card invoices,
Take a
right?
guy that's just trying to get numbers out the door and pull them for 4 hours to do this for me, right? Yeah,
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 right.
continue.
Like that's a huge one. Talking to departmental managers about what workflows they have that are so core to their department and what led them to using the software stack that they're using that does
Yeah.
differ from the organization. I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, where you're talking to let's say a CFO, right?
Sure.
And they understand, they're like, we use 365, we use Google Meet, we use or we use Teams,
And you're like,
we use this other thing.
"Erk."
And then I'm like, well, why are you spending $1,000 a month on Zoom? And it's like,
Right.
okay, well, the sales team uses Zoom. And I'm like, okay,
But
so
right.
this exists in how
Yeah.
many different departments? And if you tell me we use X, Y, and Z stack,
Yeah.
and then off the top, like just
You're using R,
blatantly,
F, and T over here, right, as
that
well,
team is
right? Yeah.
using different tools that enable them. Why are they using those different tools?
Yep.
Not from a who didn't stop them, but
Yeah.
from a what is
Is
missing
there a
about the tools
need?
we
Is there a
have.
missing piece? What
Yeah.
hole do
Is
I
it
need to kick in?
configuration?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there
Yeah.
a way that we can
Exactly.
do this in a way that
Yeah.
like balances that security properly? Are they using free tools that don't
Yeah.
do the data protection things? And how can we enable them to use tools that do balance what they actually need to do, and the data protection? So
Well,
having those conversations without the individual departmental managers feeling threatened and being willing to like give up that information, because you as IT come to them and you're like, they I think want to feel defensive immediately.
feels like an
Why are you using
interrogation,
Zoom?
not an insider asking a question, right? And
Yeah,
even if you do it as an insider, it's an interrogation in some
yeah,
cases, right?
yeah.
Like people just want to create. There was an interesting tangent in my head that I had around this, and think about it this way: we ignore things in the software world that we would never tolerate in the physical world. Like, let's say a department manager goes, "Nah, bro, I understand we're Massey Ferguson, but
Mm,
I am not Massey Ferguson. I'm going to be buying John Deere for my needs, and
yeah.
y'all can go to heck on it." That's not going to happen.
No,
You would
no.
see it, it would be visual, but yet we'll use Slack for this team and
Hmm.
Teams for that team and not
Hmm.
have a real argument of the delineation other than really cool icons. And
Yeah,
I think anyways, I think this is the interesting part about our world where we have to work through and unearth the digital in ways that you'd never have to in physical. I would see you're using a laser cutter when I'm trying to use additive manufacturing. I
yeah,
would try, right? You would just be instantly known.
yeah.
And yet we have to play that educator and fight through the challenges you're talking about.
And we're undoing and fighting against years of stigma around IT. I
Yeah.
feel within our organization, it's like we almost kind of cringe at the stereotypes that exist around
You mean the
like
beard
what
and bald head for
IT.
hackers? Or never
Of
mind, I
like what
digress.
IT does, and who they are, and that they're like they many times are like considered to be like unapproachable, mean,
Yeah.
totalitarian might be like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
word,
Yeah.
and
Or
you
security
see
team is
that.
the no team, the no department, right? In
Yeah,
that
the IT
regard.
team's the
Yeah.
no team, right? And trying to figure out, one, as an external department, two, as an MSP, just individually, and then kind of three, just as like individual contributors, how to have conversations that are non-confrontational and like really collaborative to
Yeah.
truly find the root cause of what enables people to do this work, has been our key to success, I think, at every level. And it's still really challenging because, like I said,
Is
we're
that
fighting against.
focusing on the positive? Like, let me just scenario this out and ask if this is similar. Like, instead of saying I want to know what software you're using, what software the company's allowed, and what instead focusing on we're trying to help the company to the efficient ability to bring everybody together in one place and make sure we're all rowing and getting the things we need. Like, is it more focusing on those positive outcomes than the negative and loss outcomes? Is that part of that equation?
I think it's simpler than that. I think
Okay.
that it is the difference between, like I said, at every level, seeking to respond versus seeking to understand, right? Like when you're
Just in
having
general.
conversations, like in
Sure.
general, right? Like I think a lot of times security or IT, like you get, myself included, I get so laser focused on this threat I'm trying to prevent, this risk I'm trying to mitigate,
Yeah.
that I go
Yeah.
into a conversation and I naturally think like an engineer. I'm like, how do I fix this problem?
Yeah. How can
And
I pull the
so
Band-Aid off and kill this software is the real
yeah. How do I
distillation out of that,
basically
right?
I
Like,
go in there with a giant
yeah.
hammer. I'm like, how do I
Yeah,
squash
yeah.
this? Right.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, absolutely the wrong approach.
Agreed.
The right approach is to sit down with that person and be like, how do you work today?
Yeah,
Like,
what do you
what
need
are
this
you
for? Why are
doing?
you using this? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
like show me a little
Yeah.
bit, because a lot of times they will not even know that there is like a happier compromise, a better solution, like something out
Or
there.
they may have landed on the right one. I mean, the other
Yeah.
aspect of this too truly is
Yep.
we want to find the wins. Now, to your point, if I've got something that's rife with vulnerabilities, or I've been asked not to use contractually or things of that nature, then that trumps that, right? But
Yeah.
so back to the original point of that amount of work that it requires to get good at it. And I think part of this is that I really believe there's a Dunning-Kruger challenge with cybersecurity, right? And I
Hmm.
know there's some recent discussion that statement has been debunked a bit scientifically. But the point being that as you learn something that you think you really know, you
Hmm.
get to this like plane where you understand there's so much more, and you fall into this pit of despair of understanding that you have so much more to understand that you just can't. I think cybersecurity is somewhat that way, because if you look at it simplistically, you think all I have to do is deploy these tools and get the clients to buy these tools, and I'm done.
Yeah.
But if you think about it at that precipice of despair there, you start going, "Oh my god, I have to know what they use. I have to know how they use it. I have to see how
Yep.
they're connected. I have to know the data flows. I have to understand how it's classified. I have to like think about what Copilot brings up in that
Yeah.
scenario of what data you have access to, and
Yeah.
what its risk might be to you."
Yeah, and you have to know how it's, ultimately just going to benefit the business. And so when I talked about how training was one of the most difficult things that we talked about, everything that I just told you from an approach perspective, we have to bake into our training. Like as
Right.
MSPs is like, how
For
do we
your
get
people
people
first,
at
and
every
then
level?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, all of
yeah,
that. Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Like how do we
all
get
the cake.
the great super ambitious service desk guy who wants to come in here and like find a problem and fix it, to understand that fixing that problem might actually, you might fix the technical problem, but you create this perception that then we'll have to fight against in the future, that we're being overzealous or again totalitarian in our approach.
Yeah,
And I think it's one thing that Apple has done really well just in their Genius bars and things like that, is like, for the most part, when you go in there, like the idea is about repairing the relationship between you and the technology. And so
yeah,
if we can take the same approach of trying to figure out why a person is frustrated, either frustrated enough to pick their own new solution, or frustrated in how the existing solution is configured, or frustrated because they don't know how to use the technology to make their life easier, and approach it that way, as opposed to trying to just fixing the symptom of that
yeah,
ticket, of why they call in, of whatever it is, will then build the rapport, so that when we need to deliver some unilateral changes in the name of security, it's informed by an understanding of how these clients work, and also we've gotten the buy-in and the trust from them over that series of interactions. So it really is like, as an MSP, a whole organizational challenge of like effectively saying, how do we train our people to understand security insofar as it is a method of understanding workflows. And then how do we leverage that to build trust so that when we need to take some money out of the bank, not physical money, but like trust money out of
right.
the
Yeah.
bank
Personal
to,
capital. Yeah.
to implement a sweeping change, that capital is there.
Yeah, 100%. You get it. And I think if anybody hasn't listened to this show before, I think Zach probably just said one of the first statements that I think is 100% Matt points worthy, which, by the way, for anybody listening, these are worthless points. They have no monetary value at all. But
But I'm missing them now, apparently.
you've been laying them out today, man. 100%. I think it's that challenge of understanding that we don't get seen as part of the business or in the business. We aren't seen, and we don't put ourselves in the position of understanding how they use their technology. I'll call myself out for it. I sucked at it, right? I got better. But over time, you start understanding that security is non-delineable from that. Right? Security isn't separable from the technology choices we make. That's unfortunately the way it is. No more than driving a car and car safety would be separate. Like, hey, listen, I'm going to teach you to drive a car. I'm not going to teach you anything about them concrete bunkers or things you hit. Like, I guess I'm not going to teach you anything about the other cars and how they might. No. That's all safety and security. We're going to separate that off to a separate class. It's not about driving a car. No, they're inseparable. And I think one of the things I want to bring it back to home on was Eric Woodard and Phyllis Lee and Sunil Yu and all of them did a pre-day at Beyond at PAX 8 Beyond last year, and you had a quote that kind of said there was 3 hours per employee or per user that was what it would take to implement IG1s or implementation group 1, the 53 safeguards. Do you think that's still true based on what you just said and all the time and the expectations? Is that number accurate?
I think that is a sliding scale.
Okay. Based on the size of the organization, readiness, all those things.
I would say based on how much goodwill you have built up, like it's kind of a multiplier, right? So like if you have all this trust built out already, then the amount of time it will take to implement decreases. Like I said, it's a multiplier, right?
Okay.
And so if you've got a negative
just from buy-in alone, just from personal capital as a
balance in the buy-in department, then you're going to be talking about 2x multiplier to get anything done, especially related to security. And so that might be 6 hours, right? Just to implement IG1. Wow. You might double it.
Yeah, because you would have positional command to say, Sally, Bill, I need you to go meet with Zach's team and really put some effort into this. This is a deliverable this quarter. We need this done. I need you. That's a big difference than, man, be like, humor Zach and like get him the stuff he needs when he needs it. Like those are very different statements in time of effort. 100%. That's so smart, Zach.
Yeah. So I don't want to begrudgingly get people on the security train. Nobody, the Dale Carnegie is, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still, right? Yeah. So if you're convinced of something and you don't want to, if you lose an argument, right? Yeah. You're not going to walk away from that argument wanting to believe that the other person is right, even if they are.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if you lose a battle in terms of risk, of saying this tool is too big of a risk, and you come at it from saying you're wrong for this, that, and the other reason, the person's going to try to find any possible way they can to keep using that thing.
Yeah, totally.
Instead of understanding your perspective and your point of view. And the other side exists as well, right?
And it ties to that kind of Chris Voss type mentality of, right, never split the difference, but really this understanding of if you're ever sitting on the other side of the table, and I'm bastardizing his book, so like he's kind of terrifying because he's like a hostage negotiator, so it'd be very, very unfortunate if he was mad at me on this, but is this understanding of we want to sit on the same side of the table. And that's the way I always approach things. Like when I was working with certain big vendors as a practitioner, my argument was like, I don't want to change your legal agreement to the point that it's redlined my way versus your way. I want to make sure we're both in the same boat where we share certain risks and responsibilities and we have certain understandings of sitting on the same side of the table. And I think to your point of, you can't make it adversarial. You have to make this a pitch to drive people to a common goal, which is business profit. Which is success and paying employees and driving this brand new business venture you want to succeed, or right. That's what we have to commonly come together on. And then security has to be a byproduct of that. I know I get the benefit of being a theorist now, which makes it fun and easy to say, but do you find that's a common element that lands with being successful and the things that you have found successful? Do those align with that?
Um, yes, but it's difficult, right? Like,
Okay.
and that goes back into like really understanding what the business does and how they operate. I would say probably the most important thing is by again making yourself like a invaluable resource as a trusted advisor.
Part of the
And one
team.
example of this that I'll give, because everybody says that every MSP wants to be the trusted advisor, like that's the key to success.
No.
You hear it all the time.
Blow
But
my
like a
mind,
real
Zach
world
Sherf.
example of that is, let's say I have a graphic design client, right? And I think a lot of MSPs would look at that and effectively say, if we're building a cybersecurity program, we're going to target fintech first, we're going to target healthcare first, and not our graphic design clients. And I would say the opposite is probably true, because the graphic design client might be working with large corporations with built out GRC programs, and they're completely and totally lost on how to answer those questionnaires. But the business is so critical and it's so hyper competitive that if they have the competitive advantage of having a mature security program put together, and they can really confidently answer those GRC questionnaires from the
Yeah.
mega corporations, they have the competitive edge to win the business. I've seen
Yeah.
businesses lose over the maturity of their program, and more, I've seen businesses who have put just a little bit of effort in, something like CIS IG1, where they can just really confidently answer the questions.
Here's what I've done, and
Here's
this is
what
where I
I've done.
stopped the
That's what they
line.
want to see.
Great.
There,
Yeah, great.
there's a baseline, but ultimately they want to see like
Yeah.
intent to improve, right?
Yeah,
Having a program,
100%,
like
brother.
little things like that, and just like going forth and saying, we've thought about this, gives you such an edge in the marketplace.
True
That
story.
that's why it's worth investing
You,
in.
you know,
Speak to those.
this goes to a corollary. So one of my early clients, a guy named David, he was, I wouldn't say a small shop, but they were like, I think 7 or 8 5-axis machines, right? A few lathes. It wasn't a huge shop, but
Mhm.
they were making parts, and they were doing parts for Boeing and Spirit and Northrop Grumman and, Lockheed Martin and others that would have some thoughts there. And this was in the early days of 800-171. Like, think back to 2016, 2017, and when
Yeah,
nobody gave a crap, Zach, nobody cared. Still, they don't really care.
yeah.
Like, if I'm honest, I think a lot of people don't. But, what was interesting was when David started putting all this work in, and the tides changed. We hadn't even had the interim ruling, right? That asked for the Spurs scores. None of that happened. It was still all self-attestation. And many people were just lying. And he had put in MFA. He had put in all the things to do and start meeting some of these data sovereignty requirements, things of where he was managing CUI, FCI, all the things. And everybody told him he was stupid. Because they said, nobody cares right now. You're
They're never
wasting
going to check.
money. You're
Quote,
making
they're
your
never
part
going to check.
higher.
Yeah.
Right. What's funny is even though they hadn't yet checked, to your point, he started getting rate readiness reviews from the Northrop Grummans and the Spirits, and he was standing up on a pulpit talking about his cyber program. Who do you
Mhm.
think, when those rate readiness teams went around, when their objective is to be more secure, who do you
Yep.
think, if the prices were normalized, they chose?
Yeah.
And he grew and he grew and he grew and he
100%.
grew and he grew, and he made
Even
it
if the
through times when
prices
others were
weren't
closing.
normalized, it's now becoming such a risk that it's worth it. It gives
Yeah.
you ROI. It's just
Yeah.
hard to calculate
It's hard to
because
prove,
there's so little
hard to
data.
calculate, how to tie it in. That goes back to that having something in the bucket and trust in the client. And
Yeah.
that comes with listening. And I'm going to wrap it up with that, Zach, because brother, you just gave me too many nuggets to even try to distill this down. Ultimately, I think for people watching, this is one to catch. And I don't actually say that often. You can go back and look at the last 50 episodes. But I think this is so important because the mindsets and the fundamentals are things that I wish I knew going into a security program and trying to implement a framework. When I teach my class, Zach, for implementing CIS, I had to eventually make peace with people hating me after the class. And the reason is they walk out and go, Matt, I thought I was going to walk in here to your security class and you were going to solve security for me. In fact, you've given me 10 to 20 to 30 times more to think about
Yeah.
than I ever imagined. Right. And I just had to make peace with that because that's where we are today.
And that ties, but you, the good thing about a conversation like that, and I'll end it, is we talked about client commitment, we talked about training, we talked about resourcing. Training and resourcing both lever up into client commitment, which is at the end of the day
Yeah,
the most important thing.
true.
But I think, if there was a misstep, if there was one big misstep around this, it was oversimplifying how easy something like this would be without talking about the value. And at the end of the day, approaching it now, we say it's going to take this level of commitment, but if you trust us and we do this right, it will pay dividends in the long term.
That's epic, brother. Well, I want to say thank you. It goes by quick, doesn't it? But
Yep.
if you guys haven't connected with Zach, please connect with Zach on LinkedIn. We'll get his comments down below. He's also doing this on his LinkedIn.
Yep.
And then, if you want to be on the show, reach out to me. I've got a form to fill out and we can go down this path. I've got quite a bit of a
Oh, I
guest
got
list
you.
right now. But yeah, Zach, love you, brother. You and I share very much a lot of the same visions on these challenges and where we're going. And I appreciate you being out there, man. Keep